All right, hello and welcome to the last session of the month. We have our second session of week 4, and our discussion today is going to be how you can get started in the industry, how you can take the ideas and concepts that you've learned and apply it beyond the class, how you might take the materials that you've worked on, the projects that you've worked on, and put them in their best format so that you can show off the work that you've done and show it off to prospective clients and employers. Um, so last session on Tuesday, we discussed your week 3 submissions from Angry Bots. We also discussed your new week 4 assignment, which was the sound design and Angry Bots composition description and the final game captures. So please let me know if you have any questions on any of that material as we go along. But overall, the last week here is to take what you've learned and put it into a format that you can use beyond the month. And the entire purpose of the class is really there to introduce you to this side of the industry, to show you the work and the role of a game composer working on a game project, to give you a sense of this type of work and these types of projects, to even get a sense of whether you would enjoy this type of work and something that you would seek further. And I always find that there's certainly a percentage of the class that goes through that finds a whole new opportunity in this part of the industry, finds that they really kind of gravitate towards this sort of work, or at least it expands their horizons of different opportunities that they might be interested in. And there's also a section of the class that's like, absolutely not. I now know that this is not the type of work that I'm interested in, whether it's for the technical aspect or the detail aspect of the work, or whether it is the sort of random or interactive or variation to the music, whatever it is. And both sides of the spectrum, there isn't necessarily a wrong opinion in all of this, but it's there to really show you this type of work. And the last couple of classes as you go through the degree program show you that your music is just as viable on a music album as it is in a commercial or a music library or in a film, television show, or if it is a game. And to show you that it is still just music, it is still composition and recording and production of music, and you just apply it to different media and different final products. So now we will talk about how you get your foot into the door, get yourself a whole self in through the door, and how do you get started in the industry, providing a couple of different resources that are available, and talking about actually a lot of the stuff that I will discuss will really apply to a lot of different aspects in the industry. It doesn't necessarily just it isn't just true for games. It can be applicable in lots of different areas. So we will start out with what makes a successful game composer, and we're going to talk about the industry. We're going to talk about jobs and clients and budgets and how do you figure out how you might charge and what your rate is, and we'll talk about different components of success for a game composer. And this list to start out really it comes from the book. There's or it kind of follows along with the book. That's a better way of saying it. And it there's a bit more detail and discussion in the text to kind of follow up with this. But a couple of ideas here that helps helps create a successful game composer. And the first one would be a love of video games, and this is true in any media that you are interested in. Having a passion for the format, for the art form, for the type of work that it is, and the final outcome of that is always key. And this goes for, again, whatever industry you're interested in. If you want to be a musician, a songwriter, producer, engineer, you want to own a studio, or you want to be the artist or work with artists, you want to be involved in the music industry, then you should be listening to lots of different music. You should be paying attention to the industry. You should be paying attention to what is good and bad out there in current and popular and different eras of music. You should be familiar with. Oh, actually, well, you should be familiar with the who the artists are and the engineers and producers are, and the what studios did they use, and what gear, what microphones, what instruments, what everything that you can figure out about how that music was created, why is it successful, understanding the distribution and the business side of how people actually make money off of all of this stuff, and completely immersing yourself in the industry. If you are interested in film, you should be watching a lot of movies, paying attention to the soundtrack, paying attention to the sound effects, paying attention to the credits and who the director is and the producer and the production company and the composer, sound designer, behind the scenes, any sort of material and videos and aspects, information that you can get that is deals with the production of that film and specifically the soundtrack. It just so happens that if you're interested in the games industry, you should be playing a lot of video games. You should be paying attention to games, paying attention to the industry and the technology, and who is the game developer, and who was the composer, and the sound designer, who was the the game developer and the game publisher. Basically, every aspect, technical aspects, creative and business aspects of how that was actually brought to the public, and how did the audience respond to it. Because clients speak in terms of previous projects. Musicians, producers, engineers, they talk about music in terms of previous recordings, previous albums, previous songs. Did you hear that kick drum sound? Did you hear that bass sound, or that vocal, or that songwriting technique when they went from verse to chorus, or whatever aspect about the music that is in discussion? It's often in context of previous albums and previous very common, well-known pieces of music. Same thing goes with games. Game clients, game developers speak in terms of previous games. And in film and in games, there's a little bit of a difference, because your film director or your game designer or publisher or producer may not necessarily completely speak the language of music. Typically, in a music album recording session with your artists and your producers and your engineers, they all speak the language of music. But when working with a lot of game clients, you will often find that you need to create a common language of reference, so that when somebody says that this needs to be powerful or light, or large or small, or heavy or light or big or small, whatever. If they have a lot of different adjectives and context and description for the music, you have to understand what they're talking about. So having a common language and reference of games, and just keeping up on what's new and what's current and what's happening in the industry, will make you more successful to understand where the work exists. Next one here, unafraid of creative and technical challenges. This is a big component in games, because games are basically broken and crashing and have issues all the way up until they're developed and released. And even then, they're not always complete. the games still have updates and patches and downloadable content and bug fixes and all sorts of things. If you play games or basically use any software on a computer, you know that it updates and has patches and fixes that come in after the fact. And so games, while you are working on the soundtrack, the game is still in development and production, and it's probably not happening in any sort of linear form, so that they don't start at the beginning of the game and they finish at the end of the game. It's always in whatever order that comes about through the production process, and you have to react to that. So you might be working on levels 7 through 10, and then they create levels 3 through 5, and you jump over to those while they take your music from 7 to 10 and put it into the game. And then later on, you come back, and while you are working on new music, they're taking your old music and putting it into the game, and then you're going back and testing everything and making revisions and changes, and it becomes a schedule issue of how do you maintain the production workflow. But it's a house of cards. It is software. It does crash. There are issues. A lot of the challenge, and some might even say fun of it, is moving beyond the creative and technical issues and figuring out things that once you do, a lot of folks have no clue on how you actually pulled that off, because it's brand new technology, which leads us to the next idea here, which is a desire for involvement in a new art form. The industry is really quite new. The technology is always changing and constantly pushing forward. What is being used today was not being used 10 years ago and probably won't be used 10 years from now. There's always innovation. There's always change, which also leads to a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of growth in the industry, but that also presents a whole bunch of technical hurdles, because there's not a lot of roadmaps that that you can follow of people that have done it before. A lot of the games industry sort of sits on the new edge of technology as everybody's figuring it out as they create these new amazing game projects. So the games industry, 70s in the 70s and 80s came arcades, and 80s and 90s came home consoles, and what maybe we would consider the modern part of the gaming industry came after the millennia, and so, but we're still pretty new overall. 30 or 40 years of what we might consider a modern gaming industry, compared to a movie industry or a music industry that has been around for over 100 years, that has had a lot of time for trial and error. We are still pretty brand new at it, and that, again, creates a lot of opportunity in the industry and a lot of upward growth. What else makes you a successful game composer? A passion for composition. And again, this is something that is not just for games by any means. As most going through this degree program, this is where you are going to spend most of your working life, is working in the DAW, creating the music, composing the music. And it doesn't have to be in the DAW, it doesn't have to be any particular piece of software, but you're creating music. For whatever purpose that is, whether you're helping other people make music, or you're making your own music, or you're making music for somebody else's project, whatever that is, more than likely, this is the place where you feel most comfortable, when you can just sit down in your studio and just make music. That becomes the fun and easy part of the whole process. Most of the stuff that you have been learning through this degree program becomes the second nature, easier side of the equation, and it's sort of understood that people working in the industry can start out, the baseline is make great music. That is, most people that's sort of understood that you can generate the professional piece of music that is required for their whatever their project is, just to hit the starting line. And then what actually keeps people successful and keeps them moving forward is a series of the other aspects that what we're discussing here. But it's the idea of, if you had all the money in the world, what would you be doing? And you would probably still be making music. You would have an amazing studio and all this gear and all the best instruments and whatever you use to create your own music. And if you had no money in the world, what would you be doing? Hopefully you would still be making music. Maybe you have an instrument, or maybe you'd be banging rocks together, or whatever it is. But you would still be making music in some sort of form. So that needs to be inside of you, so that this becomes the most comfortable aspect, and becomes second nature, where you can just sit down and have the music flow. It's the other aspects that makes you actually successful and allows you to keep you there and keep you going. Another aspect that is specific to games, a little bit different than the music industry, but more similar to the film industry. Sometimes in the music industry, you have sole creative control. That's not always the case for a lot of different reasons. But if you are the artist, you are the producer, if it is a small team and not a whole bunch of people getting their hands into the mix, a lot of times the artist has some, if not all, of the creative control, and it's nobody's business to tell them if their music is good or bad. And that's probably, they shouldn't just listen to nobody. They should take feedback and take opinion and whatnot. But ultimately, it is their decision. In a film and in a game project, you are working for a client, and ultimately it is their creative decision. You bring the most amazing piece of music that you absolutely love and you think is perfect for this game, and they look at it and they say no, then you have to be able to take it and put it away and start off with whatever their idea, which is probably not as cool and amazing as your idea. So being able to take criticism, being able to work as a team, being able to take creative decisions and insight and direction from somebody else, because ultimately it is their project, it is their money, it is they are the client. Then you work as hard as you can to create the music that they feel is most appropriate for their game. And some folks don't work that way, and that's perfectly fine, but it is definitely a key element of working in a team-based sport like game production. And the last one here is what actually makes you successful in this equation. The rest of those were mostly what makes you a good game composer. But this one actually will make you successful in the fact that you can keep going. Sure, there's all sorts of ways to measure success and different measurements of success and happiness overall. But it doesn't always equate to money and the business aspect of it. But that is certainly a key component to keep you going and keeping the lights on, keeping your family fed, and keeping the process moving forward. So what makes you successful is the ability to maintain clients and maintain the business side of things while you are also making amazing music. And this is really the challenge overall. A lot of composers out there can make amazing music, and that, again, is sort of understood. But the people that are actually successful and working constantly in the industry can make great music on a deadline with the guidelines set forth by the client, typically in a small turnaround time, making the client extremely happy and being able to juggle multiple projects at the same time. Because in the beginning of your career, most of the time, it works out in a way that you're going to spend a lot of time convincing people that you can actually do the work that you can do. You are very confident that you can do that work, and you have to take some time to convince everybody else that you can do that work. And most folks encounter that sort of catch-22 when you start out in the industry of nobody's going to hire you because you don't have any experience, and you can't get any experience because nobody's going to hire you. And everybody runs into that at some level in some sort of way and has their own way around that to get into the industry and to get started. So you spend a lot of time convincing everybody else you can do that. And then along comes a couple of clients in the beginning, and they say, okay, we've checked out your work. We like the work that you do. We maybe have discussed a rate and a budget, and so we like the full package that you're offering, and we're going to work with you. So we're going to give you the next 6 weeks or 6 months or whatever it is to complete all of this music and all of these sound effects. And so that's absolutely wonderful because you got the gig, and there's a bit of celebration because you got started on your first couple of projects. And then the real sort of dread sets in because you actually have to pull off everything that you said to everybody else that you can do. And you have to, again, build up that confidence over a couple of different projects so that you are sure of your skill set, that you can start working with any new set of clients. So you work really, really hard, and then you pull it off, and you create a successful music soundtrack for a successful game, and you stick your head up. The client's happy. They go away with their audio, their music, and they go release their game. Everybody's happy, and you stick your head up, and you then wonder where your next project is coming from, where the next client is, where all your friends are, because you haven't actually seen anybody or done anything or actually left your studio for days or weeks or months, just making sure that you nail out every single part of this project. And so it's then maintaining the snowball, right? The building up the snowball bigger and bigger with more and more clients, more projects, more credits under your belt, and getting the snowball rolling with creating bigger and bigger projects to work on. And so maintaining that, you'll have periods of feast and famine where at points you'll get these checks that have a whole bunch of zeros at the end of them. It's wonderful because you made a whole bunch of money, and then you have to make that last for weeks or months or whatever it is to the next paycheck, and you have to maintain it. And it's really creating a workflow across the entire year so that you're constantly getting those paychecks in some sort of nice interval to maintain from one to the next, and hopefully in a much larger sense than that. So you'll have periods of time where nobody calls you, and you'll have periods of time where everybody calls you. It seems like everybody wants to work through the summer and through the fall to get everything done to release by Christmas or the holiday season, so that we can have so there's less projects right after the holidays, and it kind of ramps up and down, and you have to kind of figure out where all the projects are. So then you get some credits and you get a name for yourself, and then all of a sudden a whole bunch of people start calling you. And then you have the opposite problem where now you have to turn away clients, and you have to figure out which ones are going to be the best, right? This one doesn't have much money up front, but over the long term, they might be a better client. This one over here, he's got tons of money, but I hate to work with them, and I hate the project that they're doing. And so is it worth it? Which one's the most valuable to you? The stress level, yeah, I can do all of these projects, but I'm never going to have a life and a family or anything else beyond my studio. There's the balance that comes in. And so it seems like nobody wants to call you, and then all of a sudden everybody wants to call you, and then and figuring out something in between of all that. And in the meantime, you have to deal with insurance and saving for retirement and taxes and contracts and payment to studios and other contract musicians. There's the whole schedules and deadlines and contracts. There's the whole business side of being successful. And typically that means that not only are you spending all your time making all of the music, but you also have to be out there shaking hands and networking with people and communicating with folks to get those projects continuing to flow in. So this becomes really the most challenging aspect of all of this. And actually, some people are way better at this part. Some people are way more effective at the creative part. And really, it becomes figuring out what works out best for you. But this often becomes a challenging aspect in what ultimately makes somebody successful. Yes, a lot of folks can make music, but actually making money, consistent money for a long period of time off that music is definitely a challenge. Here in the chat, Marcos, this topic is awesome. I have been in the music industry for a long time as a music producer. Along the way, I've found found interest in the music composition for games and even film. Here I am trying to get your feet wet. This is one of the reasons I joined Full Sail. Well, excellent. We can chat about all of these topics. If you have any questions, please let me know. I've had lots of different encounters over the years with clients, and honestly, this becomes this becomes the more challenging aspect of it, and becomes what ultimately keeps you going in the longer process. So, and I'll talk more about. Let's see. Where's my? Hold on a sec. Yeah. Okay. I'll talk more about clients and payments and who do you work for and who has creative control and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, in this last session here, we definitely want to address a lot of these topics that says, okay, so you know how to make music, you know how to put it all together, and we even got your music working in a game. So let's talk about how do we actually start working with clients and apply all of this stuff outside of class. So jobs in the game industry. We're going to talk about mostly the music and sound and audio team, but we'll also talk about some of the jobs outside of the audio team that your music works so closely with. So to start out here, we'll talk about the two main paths in working in the industry is working in-house and working freelance. Most of the time, well, I don't want to say most of the time, but let's say in the wider music industry as a whole, most of the time it is a freelance world, it is a freelance gig. You are hired, especially music composers, because a game company can go from a medieval fantasy game, and then the next year or whatever, the next game will be a modern space monster game. And more than likely, the music composer that worked on the fantasy game may not translate over to the futuristic space monster game. So just like film composers often work with directors, game composers often work with game teams, but can shift and change according to whatever the movie or the game is. So you can work in-house. Often in an audio role, it's more towards the sound design side of things. But there are certainly game teams out there that hire full-time music composers. Blizzard is a good example of that. They have one of the largest audio teams out there of about 40 people, both music and sound designers. Most of it, well, let's say it's like a quarter of them are composers and three quarters are sound designers and other audio folk, because they have games that just last forever. World of Warcraft just keeps going, and StarCraft and Diablo, and now they have Overwatch, and so they create these worlds, and then the games just get bigger and bigger, and they continue to create music and sound effects much in the style of those games. So if you do go work in-house, that means you move to the city or town where their studio is. You get in there, you get an office there, you get a cubicle, or maybe they actually have a studio. Your desk is somewhere, but they have either a small recording booth or maybe even a Foley studio or something like that. And the one of the best parts about working in house is that you are there directly with the game team. You're there with the artists and the programmers and everybody else, and you bump into them in the hallways and you talk with them at different points, and you have much clearer communication working in house. Working freelance, you have to make a great effort to communicate consistently. Sometimes that's very easy with the company. Sometimes you're just like a hermit locked away in your studio and you haven't seen the sunshine for a couple of days, and you have to actually send messages out to the game team or whatever. I mean, depends on how remote you feel from the game team. You work on a salary basis. Another one of the great benefits of working in-house is that you get paid every 2 weeks, and you just sit back and make music and sound effects. Basically, you don't have to chase clients. You don't have to chase contracts. You don't have to chase getting paid. They take care of things like insurance and medical and retirement. They take money out for retirement and all that stuff. You might get like stock options and bonuses and like sales bonuses. They sold 100,000 copies or 1,000,000 copies or something, and everybody gets a nice bonus. And game studios are often like really laid back, and it's a whole bunch of typically it's a younger set of folks, really laid back, and I know the EA Tiburon Studios here in Orlando. They have a conference room that has a conference table, has a ball pit in the middle of it. They have all the free sugary cereal and sodas that you ever could want, and tea and coffee and all that, and a whole bunch of like just benefits and whatnot. So pretty cool places to work, and you are there working full time, just working on music. As I said, more so, especially music composers are working in a freelance role. One of the benefits to the game company is that as a music composer, you bring your studio along with you. Over time, most music composers will gather instruments and gather gear and sample libraries and software and just kind of build their studio. Maybe even actually a physical space that's acoustically treated and can record and do all that sort of stuff. If a newer game studio has to build and equip all of that, that can easily be tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars or even more, depending on what they want to do. So that's a huge investment or cost that if they can just hire somebody freelance and they can work from their remote home studio, it makes a whole lot more financial sense that way. For you as the freelance composer, the benefits are you get to set your own hours. You get to set your own pay and cost. You get to work and hire and fire the clients that you want to work with. You get to work out of your home studio. But the reality of all of that is you can work the hours that you want, but you're probably working twice as hard, twice as many hours, because not only do you have to create all of the same music and sound effects, but you have to, like I said, chase clients and contracts, and the business side, you have to maintain networks and communication. You work out of your home studio, but like I said, you might be a person that actually never sees the light of day and never sees another human being for a while, and so social interactions might become odd. But most can be a discussion I've seen of those of freelance audio people where they have to learn to go be social. Then there's you get to hire and fire the clients that you want, which this is actually a good. Most of the time you don't need to fire a client, but if you don't want to work on that project, you can go find another project, or if you have a choice of A and B and you want to work on B, then you can work on that. Typically, you make more money in a freelance role because the game company does not have to cover insurance and taxes, and they don't have to do unemployment and all sorts of legal aspects that can cost them another chunk of money beyond just the salary. And they don't have to hire and fire you. They can just, your contract can lapse and the game is over and they say bye, and they don't have any sort of responsibility to you overall. So they end up, you can charge more money for all of that, but because that is extra expense of your time and effort, to actually manage all of that stuff on your own. So you got to figure out how to deal with all of that. So there's a lot of benefits. If you can get around all of that stuff, then there's a lot of benefits to working freelance. You can typically make more money because you're working on multiple projects simultaneously. You can have clients, different companies working at the same time, as long as you can manage everything. And I find that I have found that the crossover from the point of where I just feel like I have no projects to where all of a sudden now I have 2 or 3 going at the same time, and it feels like it can get overwhelming. So I've found that you can find like a resource or a network of like-minded audio folks that if you have too much work, you can farm some off to them, and if they have too much work, they can farm it off to you. It also helps out the process. Set yourself up as an LLC or an S Corp so that you can protect yourself separate from the business. If something completely goes horribly wrong, they can go after the business but not your own personal assets, right? They can shut down your business, but they're not going to take your home or anything like that. Tax shelter and safety net. You can write everything off. Now it all becomes a business expense, entertainment costs, software, hardware, gear, things like that. You have to now take into account that all of that stuff can be used to your benefit. And this next one here, we're going to talk about the Game Audio Salary Survey. And just had a few things that I wanted to point out here. This is from the Game Sound Conference, and it is... it was created by Brian Schmidt, who was the head of Microsoft during the Xbox and Xbox 360, and he is a very well-known individual in the game audio world, and he has since left Microsoft and started, amongst many other things, the Game Sound Conference, which is over in LA every year, and it might even be twice a year. It's a great gathering of all sorts of like-minded individuals talking about all aspects of game audio. And they created the Game Audio Industry Survey, which gathers information about rates, how much people charge, how much people are making. It's all anonymous and averaged over a lot of different people. So you'll get to see just kind of information about what people are charging and what might be common to the industry. So it's a great resource. I'm not going to go through everything, but just to kind of show you how it is laid out, there is a section for salaried employee. These are full-time hires, how long they've been in the industry, and their overall breakdowns of the money. It is kind of important to read through and not just look at the charts so you can get a feeling for what the charts represent. Annual income of freelancers. So these people have been in the year 5. There's the average and the median years, say 5 to 7 years, where the average salary is around $42,000, but there's a lot weighted into the freelance, like the very smaller projects overall. So more than 50% of them were above or around 58,000. So it gives you some information about projects. There's another good one down here that is per project fee, what people are charging in the total project overall for casual games, independent games, and large budget games. And it breaks it down like a per minute rate. You'll see there's a spike around $100 a minute and $1,000 per minute. This is often a kind of an independent rate. This is much more of a professional rate overall. A lot of music is charged per completed minute. And that is, well, it all depends on what's negotiated, but it is typically fully involved, like the full completed production. what is the final cost per minute of composition, production, recording, mixing, mastering, put it in the game, everything's done. What do I charge, or what is it going to cost the company? Because the company would rather think of it as one big chunk. I'm going to put X amount of money into the soundtrack. I don't have to think about it anymore. The audio team's going to take care of it, and I'm going to, for that amount of money, I'm going to have an amazing music soundtrack. So that will often include recording costs, paying other session musicians, any sort of instruments and gear that you might need to acquire. So that doesn't mean that's $100 or $1,000 or $3,000 directly in your pocket. That might be hiring a wide variety of different tools that are necessary. And that has to be part of the deal. Because typically in the beginning, when you're first starting out, you underestimate and you end up paying out everybody. And then by the end of it, you have just a little bit of chunk of money left over for you. So always understanding what your full all-in costs are going to be through the entire production so that you can pass that along to the client. And often I put like a buffer of 10 or 20% in there to make up for unexpected costs to kind of figure out what works. So I won't spend too much time. This is kind of good down here. Per unit royalties are uncommon for big titles. Rarely does a composer get points on a per unit sales or some other sales goal. If that happens, and that notice it says for big titles, for large projects, large budgets. For the smaller independent guys, if they don't have enough money up front, then they might share some profits, right? So you get a point or 5 or 10 or who knows how much percentage that you can negotiate for basically what do they think the soundtrack investment entails? Like how much does it bring to the entire soundtrack? If they don't have upfront costs, and it becomes a choice of you, like a huge, like how much risk do you want to take? You could get no money up front. You do everything for free, but you get 5% of the profits. Or you get a particular rate every delivery, or I don't know, every day or month or week or whatever it is. And you get some set payment, and then you get no percentage, or you get a half of that percentage, whatever that is. That's happens much more often in the independent side, the smaller side, because they may not have all the money up front. You can also, this is the next one, soundtrack clauses are becoming more common, though still relatively low. This is where you retain the rights to sell the soundtrack. Again, they may not have enough money up front for entire full buyout of the music, so you retain, they can use it in their game for a reduced cost, but you retain the rights to sell it online. And so because the game is successful, then the soundtrack is also successful, and you reap 100% of that profit. What else? Work for hire. Most of the time it is work for hire. They would rather buy out 100% because you have to know where your music is being used. Yes, it's for the game, but let's say they start out with a mobile game, iOS and Android. So you make the full music and sound effects and everything, all the audio for that game, but maybe they only own rights. Well, first would be exclusivity. More than always, they want exclusivity because they don't want to hear their music in any other game. Next would be different platforms. So you release it as a mobile game, but now it's got big enough, it's got more popular. Now you're releasing it on Mac and PC and Xbox and PlayStation. Well, you have to pay me another rate to distribute on those platforms. Now it's being distributed internationally. Now it's digital distribution versus physical. Now you put it on a disc and you put it in stores and you're selling it at a different cost. Well, there's a different rate for that. these are all could be. Most of the time in the beginning, you say 100% you own it, exclusive, you take it, and it's used for everything. Then do they pay for sequels? Do they pay for downloadable content? Do they pay for advertising and marketing? All the other places where your music can be used. And in the beginning, most of the time, if it's not specified in the contract, they just take it and use it for whatever they want. But later on, if you get more leverage in the negotiation, you can say, well, yes, you pay me for that, but as we go along, you're also going to pay me for X, Y, and Z, and blah, 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 as you move forward. So that all depends. And eventually you get successful enough to realize that, or no, that's not. You get successful enough to realize that you screw yourself over enough contracts. Like you do this enough and you realize, oh, wow, I screwed myself in that contract. By the time you get to the end of it, you realize that you need a lawyer for all this stuff. And maintaining all the clients becomes difficult enough. Maybe you have an agent to help you with that. The accounting and taxes and the business side becomes difficult enough. Maybe you need an accountant for all of that. That comes with some level of success. Typically, lawyers and tax accountants come pretty early in the game. But hopefully, yeah, that's a good level of success to be had. All right, so just wanted to point out the salary survey. There's a link in the slides that you can follow to check that out. One comes out every year, so definitely check it out going forward. I'm going to take a quick pause here. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm going to take about a minute or so, and we'll get into our next topic here. Hold on. All right, there we go. All right, whoops. So now we're going to talk specific jobs and job roles, the chain of command, the kind of different strata or levels of jobs in different game companies. And we'll start first off with publishers and developers. And I like to relate this over to record labels and artist production teams in kind of a correlation between the two. Game developers make the game, and game publishers market and distribute that game. Well, let's start even before that. Publishers deal with the money and the budget and the deadlines. They determine, or maybe they have an idea, or a game developer comes to them with an idea. Everybody wants to make that game. The publishers provide a budget to the game developers for the creation of the game, typically a couple of millions of dollars to get started. And then the game team hires everybody, and the game developer is who actually hires you as the music composer. And you might see a couple of different game developers and game publishers up here. Popular game publishers like Electronic Arts, Ubisoft, Valve, Sega, Nintendo, Microsoft, Sony, Atari, Activision, Take-Two, Square Enix, Time Warner. There's a couple of smaller ones down there. But and under their umbrella, publishers publish games from different game developers. They also own game developers and develop their own games. Like Sony makes the PlayStation, but they also make games for PlayStation, and they publish games by other developers for the PlayStation. So they're involved in all sorts of different aspects, and that goes for Nintendo and Microsoft also. What happened? Game publishers fund the game project to determine the deadlines. Game developers take that money, take that budget, take those deadlines, and make sure it all happens. Make sure to make the game within that amount of time, hopefully. Rarely happens. Games are often pushed back and deadlines are extended. Game developers, they create the game project. They are the artists, the programmers, the music composers, the developers, the designers, producers that actually make the game. They hire everybody. They hire you as the music composer. And ultimately, it is their creative project that you are creating your music for. Again, this is similar to the relationship of a record label and an artist production team. A recording artist gets an advance from the record label to go make a music album. They make that music album. They return it back to the record label. The record label manufactures it, markets it, advertises it, and distributes it either physical or digital, wherever they want. And so then the record label makes all the money and they give it back to the artist, or some of it. The publisher makes all the money and then they give a chunk of it back to the developers. Obviously, that's a very simplified version of the overall relationship, but effectively that's what is happening. So in the game developer, we'll start talking about the audio management and the audio team overall. You will not see all of these jobs at every game company, but you will see all of these jobs if you look at across a lot of different game companies. Different companies have different jobs. They call things different job. Well, they call different jobs with different names. The smaller game teams have less people that are wearing more hats. So there will be one audio person, or you will be the audio person. You'll do all music and sound effects and audio. But as game teams get bigger, money and budgets get bigger, responsibilities get bigger, then there's more people wearing more specific hats, if that makes any sense. Meaning that there's an audio team and there are music composers and sound designers and audio directors and leads. And so audio director is typically, if your game company has multiple games, then you might need an audio director. Where the audio director may or may not get their hands too dirty in the actual production process. A lot of times they're sitting in meetings and they are working with all the other directors of the different parts of the game, and they are determining budgets and schedules and deadlines. And they are hiring the lead managers of the game. So they hire the audio lead. The audio lead is typically one main point person in charge of all audio for just one game. So the audio lead is typically who hires you as the game composer. And they are often your point of contact and of creative direction for the game. And you report to them and take all of their changes into account. Then the audio lead is often in a lot of meetings with all of the other leads and the designing and creating the ideas and the direction of the game. But then later on, they definitely get their hands dirty in the production as things ramp up. The music manager, if your game's music soundtrack is large enough that it requires a music manager, they often have the role of like a producer in the game music soundtrack. Now, that can typically go in two different ways. If your game is a singing game or a dancing game or a sports game that licenses a lot of popular music, then maybe that music manager team is out just talking to record labels and artist management and basically acquiring the licenses and rights to the music for the game. There's often a whole legal team that's involved just doing that. If your music is not all licensed music, if it is all proprietary custom music, then the music manager, again, acts like a producer. The composer just goes off and composes music. And then the music manager will take care of hiring studio time, maybe getting an orchestra together, finding session musicians, finding the recording studio, and creating the perfect environment for that composer to record their music. So it all depends on what's necessary and how large the game project is and how much money is involved and how many people are working on it. But typically there is somebody either named an audio director or an audio lead that is in charge of the game project that you're working on. Now, the actual audio artists, the people that are creating most of the content, the music composer, obviously that's us. That's what we're talking about throughout this entire month. We're focused on the composer. We said that typically paid by a minute of finished music. So as I mentioned earlier, there is a rate that maybe as a music composer, maybe you just get a composer's rate. Or maybe they have an entire rate for the music soundtrack, of which yours is a sizable chunk of that overall rate. But it also includes time for studios and musicians and rentals and whatever. And often they look at you as the music composer to be the full, to create, record, compose, produce, mix, master, and deliver the full completed soundtrack. Most game companies want to be pretty hands-off with the process, not necessarily the creative decisions and control. They want to have their ideas heard and all of that. But what studios and what gear and how you actually pull it all off, a lot of that is up to the music composer and ultimately the music team. Sound designers, if there's often one music composer on a game project. There can be multiple composers, but there's often one head composer that is in charge of the music soundtrack. If there's one person in charge of the music, there can easily be 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or more sound designers. 3 to 5 can be pretty common in a pretty large team of a game developer. So a sound designer, a lot of times they work in-house because they have to work so directly with the animators, the artists, the programmers. There are a lot of sound effects that roll by during your music. So while your music plays for 3 minutes in the background, there can easily be 1,000 sounds firing off in that same amount of time. And so their sound effects have to be so directly interactive with the rest of the game that often it helps that they are in-house. And plus, sound designers will often be able to move from one project to the next. Earlier I said if they went from a medieval fantasy game to a futuristic space monster game, then a lot of times sound designers can make that transition a lot easier than music composers. So that works a little bit better to have those folks in-house. There's also an audio programmer or implementer. There is somebody technically minded that knows the code and knows the software and the game itself, and it is their job to actually take your music and put it into the game. Make sure that the music actually works when it plays back. And if your team is small enough, then you might be all of these people. You might just be the sole audio person. You create music, you create all the sound effects, you record dialogue, you maybe are some of the voice talent, you might be involved in the implementation of the music. And so having skills in all of these, especially music and sound effects, can just be beneficial overall, because why give half of the money to a sound designer when you can give all of the money to me that can make all of your music and sound effects? So sometimes that can work out. So, different jobs within the audio team, outside of the audio team, artists, animators, 2D art, 3D art, concept art, environments, character art, weapons, monsters, and world art. There's just so much content. If there's a team of 10 audio people, there can easily be a team of 100 artists on a game project because there's just so much content that needs to be created. The games get so big overall that a lot of them are artists and programmers. The programmers, they are the ones that technically put all of the pieces together. I always picture a lot of times I can picture a game like a puppet show, like a stage show, where the animators made the puppets, the artists made the puppets. The animators are pulling the strings to animate and move the puppets around. We're off on the side on the piano playing all the music for the puppet show, and but the programmers, they built the puppets. They built the skeletons of the puppets and the structure of the stage. They built the strings that the animators pull to make the puppets dance. They build they built the piano that we play our music on, right? Get my comparison kind of falls apart eventually. But the programmers are the ones that take all of the components and actually make a game out of it. They are very key in order to make a lot of your music and sound effects work properly. So they are often your friends in the game production process. Then there is quality assurance and QA. These are the folks that find all the bugs. They test the game, they break the game, they write bug reports and send it back to the game team, and the game team fixes the game. Then they bring it back to quality assurance, and they go, nope, still broken. And then bring back the game, and they fix it again, and they go around and around and around. And this is a great way of getting involved in the industry. It is not the most glamorous job out there, but it is a great way to get started because you are working directly with a game team. A game company will often try to hire from within to find folks, right? You want to join in the QA department, so you say, hey, I'm really good with music and audio, and I can test all of those aspects out. And now you're writing bug reports to the audio folks, and you get to have a relationship with them. And maybe when they need somebody to hire on the team, they can find you because you're already familiar with the whole process. So we know that even then, games still have problems. They still have bug fixes and patches after the fact. But the QA team is typically the last line of defense to test everything out to make sure it is all working properly. So our next topic here is how do you actually get started? How do you find a job? How do you find clients? I provide a couple of different resources to find different communities of people making games. And so just a couple of ideas. And this, again, is the type of stuff that it doesn't necessarily just apply to the games industry. A lot of this is generic audio and music industry stuff. A lot of it being in a freelance world. Actually, hold on just a sec. So the first one here is online presence. Having a strong online presence is absolutely necessary these days to be able to communicate with folks and work with folks around the world. You do not have to just live in the city where production is happening. It is happening all over the world, and you can be involved in all of that. So this means that you don't have to just live in that particular area and go knock on doors and shake hands. It's still always still better probably to be in person and create that relationship. but you don't have to be there. A lot of my clients that I work with are online. I'm in Orlando, Florida, and one of my best clients is in New Zealand, and we've never actually met in person, but we've worked for 3 years now on game projects. So the magic of the internet allows you to network and work with folks wherever you're located and wherever they're located. And so a strong online presence allows for this. And by the nature of this online degree program, you've been kind of forced to use a lot and get familiar with a lot of these tools. So having a professional email address that you check and actually communicate through, having a professional website where it's kind of like your online business card, a central repository of your work and your demo reel and your portfolio. You're constantly updating and keeping new music and new videos and new work to show off. So an updated portfolio, because people always want to know what you're capable of doing and what your work looks like. Maybe having an ongoing blog of updated news and events, or keeping up through social media. A lot of my clients and news and information that I find in the industry comes through social media. So when working on your portfolio and blog, right, you're in the home stretch of the degree program, you're getting towards the end. As you are working through your different classes, you are gathering a whole bunch of great material for your portfolio and demo reel that you're showing off. Hopefully you're maybe working on some other projects that you can also add to it and show off. And everybody is lazy on the internet. Nobody wants to spend time to download a file to check anything out. Everybody just wants to click on a link and just watch a video and or listen to something on SoundCloud and listen to an audio file. So making your demo reel as easy as possible, as simple as possible, so people can just go to a website, start clicking on stuff, and find really cool information about what you do and demo projects. A lot of times, something else I want to warn about is I will see student videos, student projects. I'll get links to videos in SoundCloud and YouTube and wherever, and I see it, but I don't know who they are. I mean, granted, yes, I know who they are because they sent me the link, and I mean, I know that. But if I were just to stumble across this page as a client, or as I'm trying to, like, they're trying to research you as a game composer to see if they like your work, maybe they stumble across something on YouTube or SoundCloud, and I don't know who you are. Maybe I see some sort of profile name or your DJ name or something like that, but there's no clear links to find out more information. So it doesn't have to be your full name, but if you use something else or but include information about who you are, how to contact you, links to other information like a website, all of that stuff, so that it's not just like, oh, wow, that's cool, but I have no clue who that is. Make it mind-numbingly simple for anybody involved. Social media, for all of its good and bad in the world, is extremely useful in the games industry and just freelancing in general. Facebook and Twitter are probably the two best ways that I keep in contact with clients and find out new information about technology and projects and new clients and just keep up with the industry as a whole. So just a couple of resources that are really helpful in this. Maybe even if you don't use social media socially, like personally, having a professional version of it is an important tool to kind of understand and get involved with, to keep up with and like even just finding people out there that are offering different jobs and different opportunities. Also, if you use social media a whole lot, Twitter and Facebook and all that, maybe you have a personal version of all of that and you keep a professional version separate, because it becomes very dangerous mixing personal and professional content on social media. Depends on who knows what you put up there. So with Twitter specifically, it is a great resource, but you have to know who to follow. So typically that takes a little while to find people and find cool people talking about cool things. So I've found following hashtags works out pretty well. And there is hashtag game audio. Oops. Hashtag game audio will link you to a whole bunch of very smart people talking about very cool things in the industry. You can find, Haagen-Dazs ice cream is probably not one of them, but what else? You can find who the people are and good resources, articles about the industry, find out who folks are working in the industry. Like here's Winifred Phillips talking about a GDC talk that she did, and she's the author of your textbook. So you just find out who people are and get connected with them, or just figure out what they do, what companies they work for. You'll find most of these people are working in studios and in jobs that you might be interested in, so that you can figure out who are important people that you might need to pay attention to going forward. So hashtag game audio is I lost my slides. Is a great resource. What else? LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a mixture of good and bad resources. You might have hit and miss success in the social media aspect of it, but one thing that LinkedIn does very well is it has it in this advanced search where you can find people and who they are and what companies they work in. Like this. Let's do this. Right, so you can search for companies, electronic arts. You can search for different companies, and you can search for people at those companies. People. Electronic arts. There we go. You can find out who different folks are at these different companies. You can also search for different words. Like I always search for audio and music and sound. You can search for different schools. You can search for past and current companies. And I do this to do a bit of research on a new job opportunity. I find a cool job, and I go find who works in the audio team, who works in the music team. I also look for HR and hiring, so I can figure out who is involved in names of all those at those companies. And then I can maybe find them on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and follow them. And if you friend people on different social media networks, yes, you can message them and you might get some variation of success on that. But I think more importantly, you are in their feed. More than likely, you are in their feed so that they, if you're constantly posting up good stuff, they start connecting your name with good work online. Oh, look at that. Oh, there it is. So that advanced search, I find you can search by company, you can search by words, you can search by schools, and get good information about who is working. Because most of the game companies are filled with techie, nerdy folks that are probably on a whole bunch of social media networks and might be providing some good information about whatever you're interested in. What else? Facebook is pretty good. Facebook is also very hit and miss. You'll get, the good part about it is everybody's on Facebook. The bad part about it is you'll see pictures of their family and what they ate for breakfast and stuff that may not actually be necessarily important. But there's also a lot of great information out there that's posted up. Other useful websites, there's Game Dev Map, which is a list of different locations in the world, and it gives you information about different game studios there. So if you were moving to Atlanta, Georgia, and you are interested in the game studios in that area, it lists them all out, and you can also find their jobs pages, right? So you go to San Diego, and you can find all of those, and you can then check out their jobs page and get more information. So if you're interested in a part of the country or the world, you might find some good information about some of the companies in that area. On Facebook, there's Facebook Game Audio Denizens, which has great information about the games industry. There's, again, a lot of very important people in the industry talking about a lot of very important stuff. This is not specific to games, but I find it's a great resource on Facebook. It's called Business Skills for Composers, and it is mostly composers talking about questions of contracts and legal issues and payment and rates and how much should I charge and did I get screwed over in this contract or whatever the question may be. And it's got a lot of very smart people giving very great answers. This is my own personal plug. This is Game Music Composition. This is the website that I have for the class. So you can find and keep up with the class beyond this month. Join in, and I just posted up a cool video about music from Breath of the Wild. Hey, thank you, Marcos. And what else? I don't know, cool stuff about the audio engine, Unreal Engine, and this is a great one. Download of 20 gigabytes of sound effects assets because the Game Developers Conference happened recently. So that's a great one. Just keeps up with the cool stuff that I talk about from the class, from the industry. Designing Sound, these are just other great websites. Designing Sound has lots of information about sound effects, music composition for games and films. If you're interested in Reddit, there is a /GameAudio subreddit that has lots of people talking about lots of cool stuff and just constantly updating. There's also Game Dev Jobs on Reddit, which has people asking for jobs, providing job links and resources in the games industry for hire and offering different services. I found this site, Orca HQ, that has some great stuff about has a specific audio page for the games industry. There's Game Audio Jobs that has listings of different current jobs out there. I always suggest go constantly look at job opportunities. Look at stuff that is lower than what you want. Look at stuff that's higher than what you would expect that you might be experienced to get. And just get a sense of what they're offering, what they ask for, what they want, what skills do they have. I typically suggest writing a resume per individual job opportunity so you can basically take the job posting and answer every one of the questions and say, excuse me, you want this? Well, I can do that. Well, here it is, and this is how all of my experiences lays out and says I'm the perfect candidate for whatever you want. So Gama Sutra is a great resource for the games industry as a whole, and it has a jobs page. IndieB Jobs, and I'll just kind of list all of these off. They're basically similar stuff. ModDB Jobs, these are for more independent games, smaller game companies. For some of them are paid projects, some of them are free projects. Different forums of people talking about the ideas in game and audio. The Unity forum, Unreal forum for the different game engine software. The Independent Games Forum has independent games developers posting about different job opportunities. Indie Gamer is another great forum that has independent game projects, and they're hiring for different different types of projects. So IndieDB, ModDB forums, just great resources. Check them out and bookmark them and go back to them regularly. Go find a whole bunch of job postings, find a bunch of job companies. Like I have a bookmark folder filled with like 50 different game companies, and it's just their jobs page. And every couple of weeks or a month or so, I will go in that folder and just look at all the different jobs and see what I can find. And every single time I'll type in audio and music and sound, and I'll find 5 or 10 different job opportunities. Some of them that are nowhere near what is interesting, and some of them are exact, like I saw recently. And I use these, I go hunt them out and I go post them up online and share them with the students. But I saw like a junior music composer at Blizzard, and I definitely posted that up recently. But you're constantly looking at all this stuff to see what's out there and see what's available. So hopefully this gives you some great resources and great insight into the industry. Overall, again, the class is really there to expose you to this side of the industry, to show you these types of projects, get you interested in this type of work, and then show you how to continue those ideas beyond the class. If you have any questions about the industry or any of the topics that we discussed, please let me know. I'll stick around for a few minutes at the end of the class if you have any questions. But this is our last session, so keep in contact with me as you move forward through the rest of your classes. As you approach graduation, if you hopefully you can make it down here and graduate in person, and we can shake your hands, say congratulations. Would always love to meet you in person. And other than that, yeah, keep in contact beyond the class, and let me know if you need anything going forward. But other than that, I definitely enjoyed the class, and yeah, let me know if you have any questions. All right, thanks a lot.